Opal Dalton Parkinson, and I'm 89 years old. And my daddy was Ely Jerome Dalton, and he came from Edneyville up here about 1900. And his daddy run a boarding house in Bat Cave. It's called Slick Rock Inn, and it was a big 3-story building. People came in the summertime and stayed, and they say that my grandfather had 3 liquor stills before probation came, and they kept whiskey around and sitting in water buckets with a gourd in it for people to drink whiskey when they wanted to. And my daddy's mother died young with cancer of the breast, and he moved up in Henderson County in Etowah, North Carolina in about 1903. And we've lived here. This is the old home place, and it's the first brick house built in the Etowah community. My daddy owned about 250 acres here in the farm, and he raised corn and wheat, rye, and potatoes and things, and he truck farmed. He'd always went on Monday to the Greenville market in South Carolina to sell his produce, and he mostly raised beef cattle to sell. And of course fertilizer was pretty expensive back then, but he said if he'd have known back then, he could have been a wealthy man if he'd used more fertilizer. He did carry the mail and rode a horse to deliver the mail way back then. And we worked in the field. We'd get up and wait for daylight to come to go to work. And it took all of us to make it go. And my mother was really a worker. We hoed corn, picked up potatoes when come potato times, and dropped potatoes when they planted them. But they'd always use all the hands, and usually he hired a lot of help in the farm too. My mother made a big garden, and she canned a lot, and that fed us, helped feed us through the winter. And of course they would hole up cabbage, and turn them upside down, dig a hole and put them in there, and kept cabbage and turnips, things like that through the winter, to help feed the family. But we always had plenty to eat, and we always went to church, and all the children always liked to come home with us from church because there's always a pot full of whatever it was to eat. And we had the big pasture down there, and the cattle kept the grass picked down. We always had a place to play ball, and all the children from school and church and everything always liked to. There's so many of us too, to play with, and all the kids liked to come home with us. My daddy owned the property where Etowah School is now, and of course my sister lives to the right up there. And building the school was really important. Education is a wonderful thing. When I started the school, they didn't want children 6 years old learning their ABCs or to count even to 100. But my mother always thought that we got that much. But the teachers always said they wanted to teach them their way. And it's just amazing to me today, the little children, what they can learn and do. And I often think if we'd had that opportunity, what we could have done with our lives. R.W. Jones was the principal. And of course, the older kids would talk about how rough he was on some of them, and I was always kind of afraid of him. I know one time I needed to come home from school. So I think the dentist was coming through the community, and my mother wanted me to come home and have some dental work done, a tooth pulled or something. And whenever I went to ask him to be dismissed, I cried. I was scared of him. I've always been a member of Etowah Baptist Church, and I guess I'm the oldest member of that church right now. People just helped one another whenever they needed help. If it was food or staying with them or trying to help them. And of course back then, people built their own caskets. They didn't have bought caskets way back when I was a kid. And just seen a lot of changes in my life. anything that you had, why, you share it with your neighbors if you knew they needed. And of course, everybody had big families back then. There's a lot to feed. Well, we had a well, and we'd draw it out with a bucket and carry it. You'd have to have big buckets, you know, to store and to have, so you'd have enough overnight and the next day. And then the pumps come, and we always had to pump water for the horses. The horses didn't drink out of the river, the cattle would. Well, we had what they called a granary, and we'd kill hogs, and they'd, you know, salt it down, hams and stuff, and bacon and all that. And, you know, in the wintertime, and then, you know, salt would keep it, you know, through the summer too, and always had seasoning. And of course, you know, they'd cook out the fat out of the hogs and made lard, and that's what you season things with, you know, over the years. And kids today don't know what lard and killing a hog or something like that at home really means. The brickyard came in, but Mr. Drysdale didn't pay them. They got what they call scrip, and he had a little grocery store, and if you needed groceries, you got that, and they kept down, you know, what you got and what you paid, but he never paid anybody. They said if you needed a pair of shoes, that he would give you $10, and you'd go to Lewis's store in Hendersonville and get a pair of shoes for your kids or something like that. But as far as paying, but that was a way of making a living. Well, it's important, you know, for children today to know, you know, that what we eat comes out of the ground. Somebody's got to plant it. But it's easier today with these tractors. I can remember the first tractor my daddy had, and it took a lot of labor off of, you know, of people having to dig and plow and feed horses and keep them through the winter. And children today just don't realize what a hard time people before them has really had. It's come easy, go easy. Oh, the history, I think it's very important because children today don't realize what a hard time that we had. They think they had it rough. They need to live a few years back. They'll really find out. I mean, you have to draw the water out of a hole in the ground. And, you know, they'd dig a well, and somebody had to get down there and put rock around to have water. And today it's just turn the spigot on.